I don't think I've heard it on the channel, but I have a particular soft spot for queer characters in art, i.e., films and books, theater, etc., who have family who root for them and try to subtly encourage them to come out by creating a safe space where they feel comfortable doing so. And I have to say, in Big Eden, Sampers, did we teach you shame? Did I teach you that? Broke me and had me bawling my eyes out. A really great way to wrap up this year's Pride Month when I think about it. Now, whilst the movie had more sweet romantic moments than it does comedy bits, Big Eden for me was still a good fit for Romcom Ganda Tuesday. Now, for those who are finding my channel or who are just stumbling on this series for the first time, Romcom Ganda Tuesday is a weekly video series I have on my channel that often drops on Tuesdays, whereby I pick a rom com from the late 80s to the mid 2010s. Often it's a rewatch. On rare occasions, it can be a first time watch. Either way, I watch the film and analyze it to see how well they hold up years later, especially viewing them through my now adult and slightly more cynical lens. This is a first time viewing for Big Eden for me. Now, if this is your first time discovering this video series, kindly note that I usually split these videos into three parts: the intro, which is what you're watching right now, the synopsis of the movie, and finally my thoughts. As such, I will have timestamps put in so you can navigate this as you so choose. Now, before I move on to the synopsis part of the video, I would like to say a big thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I started doing this full time at the start of last year, which was the last time I was in paid employment. And a special shout out to Kat, Lena, Sherry, and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses to mwah. If you too would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, maybe even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. And with that said, Big Eden starts off by introducing us to Henry Hart, played by Arye Gross, and a gay and successful artist living in New York City is making plans for the grand opening of his latest piece when he gets a call from an old friend from back home, Grace Cornwall, played by Louise Fletcher, who informs him that his grandfather, Sam Hart, called Sampa by Henry, is in the hospital having suffered a stroke. Henry immediately starts packing, even though his curator, Vian Cox's Mary Margaret Bishop, tries convincing him to at least stay for the opening day. But Henry pulls out the "I don't want to be an orphan" card, which immediately lets us clock it that Sampa is his only living relative and that Henry clearly has a very good relationship with him. And so Henry takes a plane and heads to Big Eden, Montana, where he takes on the care of his ailing grandfather. And whilst he settles in and tries to get Sampa to at least follow the doctor's instructions, i.e., no oily, fatty, or sweet foods and no beer, Sampa, who is quite independent, I mean, he suffered a stroke whilst fixing the shingles on the roof of his neighbor's house, chafes underneath all the rules. But it's pretty clear that he and Henry have a great relationship. We also get to see that Henry is quite close to Grace, who teaches kindergarten in Big Eden and is a good friend of his. Grace points him out to Henry's best friend and teenage crush's kids, Ben and Andrew, who are now in her class. This is how Henry finds out that Dean, said bestie and crush, is recently divorced and back in town. Matter of fact, he arrived a week prior to Henry. It's also pretty clear from Grace's teasing that she knows about Henry's feelings for Dean. Grace, being the sweet angel that she is, who knows that Henry can't cook for shit and that Sam is ill and recovering, works out a system of support to have the two of them fed via Nan Martin's widow Thea's cooking and Eric Schweig's Pike Dexter's delivery of said cooked meals. Pike, we immediately see, has a big crush on Henry since they were teens, the type of crush that makes his usual reticent behavior even more sullen when he doesn't really speak much around Henry. However, although he doesn't say much, his actions speak for him. Once he realizes that Henry and Sam aren't big fans of Widow Thea's cooking, and so Pike picks up a bunch of cookbooks and starts learning and cooking for the heart, something that Henry and Sam really enjoy. But Henry believes that all the food is coming from Widow Thea, who he thinks has gotten better at cooking, while Sam, from the clueless responses from said widow, realizes that all their food is coming from Pike instead. Now, whilst Pike is taking care of Henry and Sam one meal at a time, Dean, on the other hand, is also trying to be present for Henry by helping him build ramps around the home to help Sam get around easier. He also takes Henry to social gatherings and dances with him. There are also moments of casual touches where we see Henry definitely being affected by them, and moments of almost kisses from Dean, but Dean never really follows through. Meanwhile, Widow Thea, who cannot help but try and matchmake Henry, and so she creates this moment where she can introduce him to any and all eligible women in town and out of town. But the minute she gets the confirmation, because mind you, she had her suspicions but didn't want to assume. But the minute she gets the confirmation that Henry is gay, she starts bringing him around any and all eligible men in and out of town to his dismay. Henry, though, clearly only wants Dean, something that the cowboys who hang around the general goods store that Pike runs and who know that Pike is in love with Henry are aware of. And so they try to offer Pike some comfort, except Pike is insistent that he's doing everything he's doing because he just wants to do nice things for Henry, which is just so goddamn sweet. Henry, however, has no idea that this is happening and instead is caught in his feelings for Dean until they both have a moment where they kiss. But then afterwards, Dean pulls away and tells Henry that he can't do this no matter how much he wants to, i.e., he isn't attracted to Henry even though he wants to be. Henry, on hearing this, informs Dean that he cannot keep doing this, i.e., keep stringing Henry along, which it seems is something that Dean has been doing since they were teenagers. Now, you would wonder why Henry said this, but we get confirmation during Thanksgiving dinner. Now, Thanksgiving sees everyone show up to the Hart residence, including Pike, who Henry is now slowly falling for and who he invited over. But the minute Dean senses the brewing tension and connection between Pike and Henry, he corners the latter in the pantry and basically tells Henry that he wants to try again. At his words, Henry, who is done at this point, erupts at Dean and insists that he cannot continue to do this to him. Dean responds by calling Henry selfish for ending their friendship, which makes no sense because Henry doesn't actually do this. All because Dean cannot bring himself to be attracted to Henry. He then storms away whilst Henry chases after him. Pike at this point also chooses to leave, and Henry again tries and fails to keep him around. This makes Henry even more upset. He eventually starts making plans to return back to New York and even offers up the painting that he was working on, which he and Pike had discussed his inspiration of it, and which Pike had shared his story, a Native American story about it, and offers it to Pike. Pike takes this painting on to mean that and interprets it as Henry is telling him goodbye. Later on, Sam tries to bring up the truth of Henry's sexuality because at this point, even though practically everyone in town knows, Henry still hasn't actually vocally come out. And so while Sam tries to convince him to open up by stating that he hopes he isn't the one who taught Henry to feel shame since he believes that his grandson is perfectly made in every way, Henry breaks down in tears in his grandfather's arms. Some days later, when Henry arrives home one night, he finds Pike looking devastated and he hits him that Sam has died. The entire town then falls into mourning Sam, who's built practically everyone's home in town. They all show up for the funeral, even Mary Margaret, who shows up from New York. But the one person who is conspicuously absent is Pike, who stands outside the church but doesn't actually go in, nor does he actually enter the house for the after service meetup that happens afterwards. Henry, who is pissed at what he believes is Pike ignoring Pike's own relationship with Sam, goes to the general goods store, but Pike, who is in the darkness, doesn't respond to him or open the door. As Henry starts getting ready to return to New York, he hands over the dishes for the meals, and that is when he learns that it wasn't Widow Thayer who had been cooking his and Sam's meals that they had been enjoying, but that it was instead Pike all along. Pike, meanwhile, finally realizes that he should fight for a chance to be with Henry and goes chasing after him to the airport. But unfortunately, he arrives just as the plane is taking off. He ends up going back home and is surprised to see Sam's truck parked in front of his own. As he enters the store, he's shocked to see Henry, who it turns out did not leave for New York and was right there waiting for him. The two of them come together to the delight of the townsfolk looking on at them. And several nights later at the town's picnic, we get to see Pike and Henry dancing in public and eventually kissing. The end. Now, as someone who watched Sweet Home Alabama a couple of weeks ago and absolutely hated that film, when Big Eden first started, I was bracing myself for an experience I would not enjoy because whilst I know the trope, big city artist or worker returns to their small town, hometown, and rekindles a relationship with someone from said hometown, someone that they knew when they were much younger before they left the town for the big city. I know the trope is one that is quite beloved, but to be quite honest, it's not my cup of tea. I usually cannot stand it. Big Eden, however, changed my mind on that. And it's not just because it's gay, even though, let's be honest, queerness does often elevate a story. But I think it's was actually able to create a believable love story that I could find myself rooting for, whilst at the same time being authentic to the queer experience, even as it is set within an utopian small town in Montana that has cowboys hanging outside the general goods store and rooting for its owner finding a happy ending with the boy he's loved since they were teenagers. It is fantastical. One would say that no small town in Montana could be so accepting of gay men to the point that everyone in town is rooting to get them together back in 2000. But I mean, yes, it's fantasy, and queer folk deserve that as much as everybody else. So I'm quite happy with it. But as I was saying, Big Eden was able to take the big city to small town trope and make it work for me. And after I finished watching this film, I sat with it for a while to try and figure out what it did differently and why I enjoyed it so much. And I think it's because at the core of it, it really does take its time to establish its stakes, to explore the reasons why Henry Hart, played by Arye Gross, was in New York in the first place, and to highlight just how he can get to have everything he wants and more, even whilst returning home, all without sacrificing himself, his growth, his independence, or his agency. Plus, the addition of a well written love interest in Eric Schweig's Pike Dexter just elevates it all. Now, I know it's easy for some viewers to be confused about the high regard slash opinion I have for Pike, since he's written to be this more taciturn, quiet character in the movie. And to that, I will say it's because it still works. Yes, Pike is someone who is written as being shy, who's had a crush on Henry since they were in high school, but Henry, who was in love with his then best friend and high school athlete Dean Stewart, played by Tim DeKay, which can I just say, I spent the longest time being all, why does this man's face look so familiar? Before it hit me that he was in White Collar with Matt Bowman, then I was like, ah, I remember you. But anyway, as I was saying, the movie establishes the bits of commonality between both Henry and Pike right out the bat. Both of them have been in love with someone since they were since they were high schoolers, someone to whom they never really felt like they would have the chance to get to be with them because the one they love is out of their reach. For Henry, this is Dean, his very straight best friend who has some sort of weird codependency going on with him, and I will come to Dean in a bit. And for Pike, it's Henry, who, like I said earlier, is not available because he's very much still in love with his best friend. And whilst the movie could have wasted its time having Henry be utterly besotted with Dean whilst ignoring Pike until like maybe the last 10 minutes when he would suddenly realize that, hey, I think I like Pike instead, we don't actually get that. Writer and director Thomas Bezucha, who surprisingly also wrote and directed The Big Stone, a Christmas movie that I definitely did not enjoy. And I made a video about it, which you can check out from the playlist if you're interested. But as I was saying, Thomas Bezucha did lay the seeds early on in the movie, building up the relationship between Henry and Pike and juxtaposing it against what he had with Dean, which wasn't real, i.e., we see a lot of instances of Henry constantly cutting himself off for Dean, being present for him, and only being able to take in snippets of affection that Dean tosses his way in meager amounts. Compare that with his interactions with Pike. Pike, with whom he talks about his art, about the inspiration for it, the mythology, and him being stuck with regards how we could complete said art. Pike, whose words in turn inspire Henry's artistic vision, and he then gets to present the completed piece to Pike as a gift. I find it very interesting, if very interesting differentiation that highlights the role that Pike plays with regards his vested interest in anything that Henry is doing and how he pours into him, whether it's by giving Henry inspiration with regards his art or feeding him, which brings me to that point, food. Now, I am definitely never going to be the person who denies my love for food. I love food. I think one of my very active love languages is having friends and family and partners cook for me just as I cook for them. What can I say? It's the Nigerian in me. Food is how we show care. And Big Eden takes things the extra mile to really bring this point home. Pike, who notices that as much as Nan Martin's widow Thea tries her best to cook food every day for Henry and his grandpa, sorry, I meant Sampa, her food is atrocious and Henry tries to bear it. And so he starts learning. He, being Pike, starts learning how to cook. I'm not going to lie, that got me in the gut. The minute Henry sheepishly admits that cooking isn't his forte and that he cannot cook, only for Pike to start buying cookbooks and checking up recipes online so that every night he can have fresh, delicious food offered to Henry and his Sampa. I was swooning. I was screaming, "This is love" at my television because, like, let us be real. This is love. That is the real deal. Bonus point because when the cowboys try comforting Pike about his non existent chances to get with Henry, since it was quite clear to everyone that Henry was still stuck on Dean, Pike's response about him doing it not because he wants any acknowledgement from Henry, but because he just wants to be able to care for Henry in whatever way he can. And he's willing to do so silently since Henry, up until this point, still believes that Widow Thea suddenly got very good at cooking and had no idea that it's all Pike's doing. It made everything worth it. I mean, that type of selfless love, that's the real shit right there. It's so much care. And that care extends not just to Henry, but to Sam Hart as well, because Pike knows that Henry's grandfather is only remaining relative. And it's such a great way of having us see that as the audience, the fact that Dean never actually spends time alone with Sam, except when Henry is also present. But Pike, on the other hand, gets to develop a relationship with Sam that is outside of Henry. I repeat, it is just so sweet. So we have moments of Pike caring. We see his connection to Henry building, his ties to Henry's family getting stronger, and all of this lends a believability to the development of their romance in the film. Now, like I said, the romance for the big city to a small town trope is something that I'd always had a problem with because it never really felt earned. See the video I made on Sweet Home Alabama for an example, but with Big Eden, it works. Something else that works for me at least is Henry's return to Big Eden. Because firstly, his work is something that he can quite frankly do anywhere. His character is an artist, specifically a painter. And we already established at the start of the movie that he isn't the sociable sort. So it's not like he's partying it up every weekend in order to get his name out there as an artist. His art is the sort that he can create from anywhere and just simply send his pieces over to his curator, Mary Margaret, to sell. But more importantly, it's the fact that the movie makes it quite clear that part of the reason why Henry leaves Big Eden and moves to New York is so that he can get away from Dean and hopefully get over his feelings for him. Of course, that doesn't work out as Mary Margaret confirms for us, and that even with Henry's many years of therapy, he's still being unable to let go of Dean, which by extension made his continued stay in New York relevant. With him having resolved his feelings for Dean and coming to terms with the fact that no matter what he does, Dean cannot have any sort of sexual or romantic feelings for him whatsoever, and instead he finds himself falling for Pike, then narratively speaking, his reason for staying in New York is now defunct. He doesn't need to continue avoiding Dean or the pain that brings him. And so he can either choose to remain in New York. But as we see when he's having that conversation with Grace about the attraction that New York has for him, which is basically my apartment looks really cool and restaurants, then we can see that Henry isn't really fixated on New York and what it has to offer him. Like, say, Reese Witherspoon's character in Sweet Home Alabama was, since it was tied to her identity and her work in that movie. New York was to get away from Dean for Henry, and now that that isn't relevant anymore, it has further believability and generates acceptance on our part to have Henry come back home to Big Ethan, because we know he's not sacrificing himself, his career, or his identity in order to remain in love in a small town. And speaking of Dean, which, like I said, I was going to come back to, I will say though that, like I stated earlier, the movie does still highlight an authentic queer experience, which is the unfortunate circumstance that a lot of queer teenagers have to deal with. Us accidentally falling in love with our street best friend. It's like a rite of passage at this point. And whilst I do not fault Dean for that, Henry's feelings towards him isn't on Dean, and it's not his fault that he isn't able to reciprocate Henry's feelings, which, to be fair, is something that Dean wishes that he was able to do. What I do have a problem with, though, however, was his out of pocket response to Henry afterwards at the Thanksgiving dinner, because we see it quite clearly that the reason why he reacted the way he did is plain jealousy. He's been aware since they were teens that Henry likes him. And one could say that he sort of strung Henry along in all this time, where he drips out affection and care and physical touch, but in a way that doesn't really cross any lines, which in turn keeps Henry hopeful, and then is able to maintain that friendship. And so when he does take the plunge and kisses Henry, and there are no sparks because there is no attraction on Dean's part, Henry realizes that he cannot continue and chooses to step away. Thanksgiving, however, sees Dean realize that there is some sort of attraction going on between Henry and Pike. And this is where, like I said, his behavior had me so pissed, because he does that whole let us try again, something that Henry snaps at, because this is Dean wanting to string him along yet again, because Dean gets some comfort and validation from Henry wanting him, and he clearly doesn't want to lose that with Henry's attention shifting to Pike. And so he gaslights Henry, makes him out as being selfish for wanting to move on from his feelings for Dean, and lashes out in a way that had me screaming at my screen, even as I wanted to shake Henry to make him realize the truth of what Dean is doing. That, I can say, is the only bit that marred what was otherwise an almost perfect movie for me. The fact that Dean got away with that bullshit, and then we saw him and Henry back to being friends again at the end without anything to hint that an apology was given. Instead, what we could infer was that Dean got together with one of their classmates, Anna, and that meant, of course, that he's most likely shifted that codependency from Henry to her. Others might have interpreted that scene with Anna differently, but that is how I saw it. But like I said, other than that brief bit that marred the experience for me, the rest of the movie was an utter delight, especially, like I stated at the start of the video, the fact that it highlights quite well Sam Hart's words about shame, i.e., there is no shame in being yourself. There is no shame in letting that self be seen by those who love and support you. There is no shame in realizing that you deserve better. And there is no shame in chasing after what you know you deserve. And personally, I think it's an absolute wonderful messaging to remember as we wrap up Pride Month this year. But of course, these are all just my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Whether or not you agree with me, please share them in the comments. Like this video, however, if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet, but enjoyed anything of what I had to say, share it so others can find my channel as well. Or you can check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be possibly potentially be interested in. I have them both linked in the description bar. I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.